Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In a Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes with Tobi joining us, the CEO of D2IQ. We're going to be talking about intelligent DevSecOps and what that means and what is the future of Kubernetes and DevSecOps. So stay tuned. Another 5 minutes, we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're very lucky today. We have Tobi, the CEO of D2IQ, a great company bringing Kubernetes to enterprises all over the world, but also in the US government. So it's going to be a great episode. If you have questions about what is the future of DevSecOps and the future of Kubernetes, you're at the right place. Start asking the questions now. We already got about 150 questions already from social media. So if you want to ask your question live, go into the comment section and just start with a Q so we know it's a question. And if you want to share you're here with us today, put your name in the comment section below so we can highlight you on the screen as well. I wanted to remind everybody to join our mailing list. Go to inthenickoftime.tv and register to get one email a week to notify you of the next episodes. Also, if you have not checked it out yet, go check out learnwithnick.com and try it now for free. We have also 2 coupon codes, 50% off for military, civilians, and veterans with the coupon military, and then 20% off Let's Beat China. To keep up and make sure that your learning is up to date. We update the videos every 6 months to make sure all the content is up to date. So check that out. Also, if you've not watched the news with GPT and what's going on in the world, and you're stuck in the bunker somewhere, check out AskSage.ai, the new company we created to bring ChatGPT to the U.S. government and the government of NATO partners as well. So check that out. We can actually ingest data, so custom data on top of GPT. We can also tap into real-time APIs and real live queries in real time to be able to get better insights. We can also create personas and streamline the entire data ingestion process for you and get it accredited. We also have a plan right now working to bring it to the classified environments as well. So go check it out, AskSage.ai, completely free for the first 50,000 tokens per month. So go check that out and let us know if you have different use cases. We can help you there. The latest video we posted is on modular architecture and why it matters and how you can actually move at a pace of relevance by having a modular architecture, moving away from your monolithic architecture. So check that out if you have not checked our videos on Lego blocks and how to cut your monolithic architecture into microservices. Last but not least, we have the stored on internettime.tv. All the 100% of the profits go to the Future House Foundation to help veteran military families. So go check it out and buy something fun, and that will go to our military families. With that, so excited to have Tobi. Tobi is the co-founder and CEO of D2IQ. D2IQ is one of the last independent company that's not owned by a large group or owned by one of the cloud providers to bring Kubernetes to enterprises and companies. He has a broad array of Fortune 50 companies and government agencies, including the DoD. D2IQ brings all that complex automation to bring Kubernetes to life and managing it at scale and removing kind of the pain and the bottlenecks. And we'll talk about what that entails and kind of how do we see the future of Kubernetes and DevSecOps going into the next generation of AI-empowered capabilities that we see coming all over the world. So with that, we're going to bring Tobi on. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Great to be on the show.
So excited to have you. We're lucky because people don't know, but D2IQ had a different name before, and maybe a lot of people heard of Mesosphere, obviously, and Mesos, and obviously that was the foundation of the company, and then the evolution led to the renaming to D2IQ. But obviously, we want you first to give us a little bit of your journey. So do that so we can get a better understanding of not only what the company is about, but also who you are.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of people, I think still today know us about Mesosphere. Mesosphere was one of the early pioneers of this cloud native space. And I'm one of the founders of the company and the current CEO. Mesosphere, or now D2IQ, has been in business for 10 years. We're actually turning 10 this year. And we've been helping large organizations across, Global 2000 companies and government organizations adopt cloud native technologies like Kubernetes, and before that, Apache Mesos. So I'll go kind of a little bit further back than that and talk about, my beginnings with infrastructure. It's something I've always been passionate about, and I actually started a company with one of my D2IQ co-founders when we were both 15 years old. The early days of the internet, the late 90s, and we even back then helped organizations run efficient and reliable infrastructure. So kind of got a glimpse of that very early. We kind of built our own servers at the time and put them in data centers. And another thing we did early, which was kind of fun, was we adopted AI early on. Even back in the 90s when it was kind of called machine learning. So we built one of the first spam filters at the time, which was really fun and a really had a really big impact on our customers. So kind of learned early how to build infrastructure and operate servers in a data center. And I grew up in Germany. I moved to Silicon Valley after college, and joined Airbnb as one of the first engineers. And one of the many hats I wore back then at Airbnb was I helped them design their infrastructure, effectively their PaaS. And at some point we started adopting containers. So we were one of the first large deployments out there that ran containers in production at scale. And my two co-founders, Ben and Flo, did the same at Twitter. They rebuilt Twitter's infrastructure, back in 2009, 2010, using containers and using Apache Mesos, which was the first open source container orchestrator. And actually, my co-founder Ben created that at Berkeley as a research project. And so, we did what you always do with open source projects. We hosted a lot of meetups, and some really interesting folks started showing up to those meetups. Big brand companies that we all know, household names, and they all told us about the challenges they were having with their infrastructure, how they need to be more agile, they need to ship software faster, they need to build infrastructure in a more resilient way so it doesn't go down and they lose revenue in the process. And they also needed to be more efficient with their infrastructure. So, spending less on servers and requiring fewer humans to run it. And those were problems we had solved very effectively with containers at Twitter and Airbnb. So we decided, let's commercialize this open source project. Let's make it approachable for the mainstream enterprise and government organizations too. And that's how Mesosphere was born. And then over the years, we shifted our focus to Kubernetes. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But our core mission has remained the same, and that is to help organizations build their next generation products, innovate faster, using intelligent infrastructure. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
That's not impressive whatsoever, I can tell you that. I'm a little bit upset because I thought I was the only one that had created a company at 15. So I'm a little bit upset about this. I'm not gonna lie. So obviously a pretty amazing background, both on the infrastructure side and then, of course, leading into the cloud native world, the cloud adoption, the scaling, the enterprise nightmare of Kubernetes. Of course, Mesosphere was already solving the bulk of the challenges, and then the evolution, to Kubernetes came through, and you guys embraced it and turned into a D2IQ. I think that's kind of what led to the renaming of the company. I believe is kind of the expansion beyond the Mesosphere and the Mesos project to start also engaging in Kubernetes. Is that why you guys started to change name, I guess?
That's true. Yeah, we did eventually, shift our entire focus to Kubernetes. It was kind of a long path that led up to that. But we, in 2019, we decided that we're going to actually discontinue our first generation product, which was based on Apache Mesos, and only focus on Kubernetes. And because we had Mesos in the company name, we decided to rename the company too. We just wanted to make sure there's no confusion about what we do. That's why we picked the name D2IQ, because we want to help organizations on day two when they're in production. Also on day 0 and day 1, of course, but really building
the hardest problem is people always realize that the hardest problem is actually not the day 0 and day 1, but the day 2. So you're not saying, obviously, you're not helping the installation piece, but that's the easy step, particularly if you do it wrong and you do it manually. But then the day 2 ongoing updates and the management of that is where you shine, right?
That's absolutely right. Doing this shift towards Kubernetes, it was such an interesting story, and I think few people know this. Actually, there was a really interesting DockerCon in it must have been in 2015, I believe. So a few things happened at that DockerCon. Kubernetes was announced. So Google, that was the first public presentation of Kubernetes, was at that DockerCon. And the other thing that happened too was Solomon, the founder of Docker, was on stage saying, if you want to run Docker containers in production at scale, you should use Mesos. So it was, I think, a really interesting DockerCon. A lot of things happened there. And what we did after DockerCon is we, the Google folks, the Craig McLuckie and Joe Beda and others that were working on Kubernetes, we partnered with those folks early on. So another thing that few people probably know is that we were the 3rd largest contributor to Kubernetes 1.0. So we engaged with that community early on, and we just saw the massive traction that Kubernetes had early on. It was just a very vibrant community, and it was clear that Google and then later on others too just poured a lot of resources into this project, and we knew it was going to be big. And our we were always very mission driven. We knew that technologies come and go over time, so we knew that we're going to do the shift to Kubernetes eventually. And seeing that momentum in the community, and then eventually customers also asking for it, that's why we engaged in that community early on. We actually brought our first Kubernetes product to market in 2017, so quite a while ago. And one of the challenges for us, like why we didn't go all in on Kubernetes immediately, was because it still needed a little bit more time to mature, right? We've always been focused on large mission critical deployments, large organizations doing very important stuff. And so we kind of ran our Mesos product line and our Kubernetes product line in parallel for a while, until we were confident that we can recommend this new Kubernetes product to these high-end customers. And so we took a lot of the things that we learned, being pioneers and creating one of the first container orchestrators. So for example, our team designed the container storage interface with Google that was, became the industry standard really for attaching storage to Kubernetes. And then eventually in 2019, we said, now it's time to go all in. And we built a completely new product line that's called DKP, the D2IQ Kubernetes platform, and brought that to our customers starting in 2019.
Yeah, I remember when I had met the team back in 2018, obviously the focus was still on Mesosphere, and I had mentioned, hey, the DoD, we're embracing Kubernetes, and I remember you and the founders, there was other founders, of course, part of the company at the time, and we had this whole discussion on how that was going to happen. And obviously, it's pretty rare to see companies willing to shift technology stack, right? Particularly when you created it, there's this kind of a baby mindset / ego / whatever else that comes into play. And you rip the Band-Aid. I mean, that's a tough thing, right? Most people, I mean, you look at Kodak and everybody else, they have a tough time reinventing themselves, and now they're gone, right? So you guys managed to do that.
Yeah, I always say, in some ways this was a very hard decision, and in other ways it was a very easy decision. Very hard, obviously, we created Mesos, and it had clear technical advantages in areas. By the way, still scales to much larger clusters today. Right. But the reality was that people wanted to be part of a community, right? That Kubernetes community, that ecosystem, was just growing much faster and larger. And I think that is a really important factor in how organizations pick technologies, right? That ecosystem, the vibrancy, the community is a key part of their decision. And so it became obvious at some point that that's where the momentum is. And it wasn't really, what made the decision easy is it was clear who, what other technology is going to be the winner. It wasn't like we had to select from like 5 other things. It was very clear where the momentum was. And so in that sense, it was an easy decision.
And you wouldn't believe the heat I got when I started. There was such a massive vendor look into PCF, Cloud Foundry. And in fact, the Air Force was the largest customer of Pivotal with $100+ million, which was, I think, a fifth or a sixth of the revenue at the time. Pretty mind-boggling for a single customer. And when I started pushing Kubernetes as the standardized orchestration stack, to bring both the baked-in security and all the benefit of the community you mentioned. I think that, a lot of people were upset. People kind of reacted a little bit different from you guys, right? They fought it to the point where they had to be bought by VMware to really solve it. I mean, they kind of brought PKS, but it was really like the stepson that they didn't really want to sell. If you were approaching Pivotal at the time and talking about Kubernetes, they would always push you to PCF and pretty much say that Kubernetes was going to be a waste of time until, of course, the VMware acquisition, and now PCF is pretty much no more. So that's just interesting how I think it's important for people to pay attention to this, right? Because the reason I'm mentioning it is if you don't shift with the wind and you get stuck in time, you pay the price.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think, one of the things that's very unique about the cloud native ecosystem is just the speed of innovation, right? Like the speed at which things are moving forward and new projects popping up all the time, right? It's not just Kubernetes, it's many things around it as well. And so you have to be agile, you have to be on your toes and go where the momentum is going for many reasons. Another one being security, right? Like you have to roll forward in order to get the bug fixes and get the latest and most secure technologies. That's in today's times very critical too.
Yeah, no doubt. So obviously, pretty big shift, and then that took you a pretty smart way also to then commercialize what is open source, and companies struggle, right, between, and how many companies. I mean, look at Docker, right? I mean, they created the container space. They're still here, right? They kind of trying to reinvent themselves now, with the Docker desktop and all that stuff. But I mean, one could argue they should have been maybe 1,000 times bigger. I'm pretty sure investors were hoping for better than this. But when you look at the open source companies, and there's this new concept now called the commercial costs, commercial open source software, which is just a funny way of saying it's a commercial product, surrounding embedding open source bits in a very much vendor locked in kind of way. So there's a balance, right? People want the enterprise features, right? And so companies now push you to the paid version to get more common sense enterprise features like RBAC and FIPS compliant validation and all the stuff you expect, right, from an enterprise product. So how did you guys manage to find that balance, right, between the value, the vendor lock-in aspect of where you obviously want to sell the product, so you want to find that balance, but at the same time you also don't want to burn the bridges with the open source community and the whole community.
Yeah, it's frankly it's a many tough decisions. So to anybody out there that's also building a commercial open source company, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this and getting it just right. It's a fine balance is the key word you have on the slide there. So how we do it is, well, first of all, we kind of do the usual stuff that most commercial open source companies do. And that is, we believe to be successful with open source based software, or really any kind of software, there are 4 pillars. The first is the product. Obviously, it needs to be a strong product, strong solution that solves a real problem. But then the 3 other pillars are to provide 24/7 support, the industry's best professional services, and training. So those are the 4 pillars we provide. Support, obviously very critical for production deployments, for mission critical deployments. We provide 24/7 support and with a very quick response time, super highly skilled people, folks that have been running clusters in production themselves. So, what our customers always say is when they get on the phone with our support, they feel like there's people that are speaking their language, that have been there and done their job. So that's key. Professional services, right? There is, and training too. I think we still today see many projects failing because on the customer side, there's some kind of skills gap, right? They need to train their people up on cloud native, how to containerize applications, how to operate production infrastructure, DevOps, DevSecOps, and so forth. So that's why these three other pillars are really critical. So that's not anything unique. Most open source companies do that. They offer these 4 pillars. But when it comes to the first one, the product, how do we differentiate our commercial offering, our enterprise offering, from just the open source bits? There's a few unique things that we do. And in general, we look at things that maybe the community isn't so much interested in solving, right? The cloud native community, of course, is moving really fast. They're doing a lot of innovation, but they're less interested in supporting a huge amount of different environments, right? A huge array of operating systems, different variations of air-gapped and classified environments. So that's work that we do, right? We make sure that all those bits work in this whole array of environments, air-gapped, classified, different virtualization software, different operating system vendors and versions. A lot of work goes into that, right? Into testing and verifying every release. I should mention too that our commercial products are based on pure upstream open source. So something that some other vendors do that we don't do is we don't fork any of these components. We believe the industry standard is to use pure upstream because that gives you, the best access to, security fixes, patches. That makes it the most compatible with other pieces in the ecosystem. It allows you to tap into the innovation that's coming out of those communities instead of, being on a fork, being on a dead end. So that's really important to us. And then where we add a bunch of value around these pure open source components is through intelligent automation. So the work that usually people have to do themselves by, writing custom scripts and then, humans running those scripts in order to stand up your infrastructure and automate your infrastructure, we've built all of that automation right into our products. So the installation, the upgrade process, any other day 2 operations, as we call them, are highly, highly automated by, intelligent software that we built that is part of our products. And, that's a pretty difficult to get right. You really want to follow all the best practices in how you stand up your infrastructure and upgrade it and so forth. In particular, in, very limited environments like air-gapped environments and classified environments, which we support across the DoD. So, if you think about it, what you're doing is you're taking effectively a software that is born on the cloud, Kubernetes and all the other pieces in the ecosystem, born on the cloud, which is always connected to the rest of the internet. You're taking that and you're putting it in a place that has no internet connection. So a lot of things start to break when you do that. And, you have to find really smart ways to make it work in an easy and straightforward way in those environments. And so we did a lot of work there. We think, we have the best Kubernetes solution for air-gapped and classified environments on the market. Allows us to stand it up really, really quickly. I talked about automation and the intelligent automation that we ship as part of our software. One thing that we're really excited about that we're working on right now, it's actually available to our customers as a tech preview today. It's called Insights. And what that is, it's a capability that takes the human expertise of our team, who are world-class Kubernetes experts, and puts it right into the product. So it's sort of like your software-based, AI-based new coworker that is, a Kubernetes expert that helps you follow best practices, calls out when you got your configuration wrong and other things. It helps you root cause issues in your clusters and also helps you anticipate and predict potential future problems, so you have enough time to fix those things before they become real problems. So, in a nutshell, a lot of testing, a lot of verification, a lot of integration work, a lot of human expertise that we add, and a high degree of automation and intelligence that makes it all work. That's what we add on top of the open source core.
Sounds like easy peasy kind of work. So that should be only taking 20% of your time. So I don't know what else you're doing, but
It's pretty easy. No, I'm bored most of the time.
right. So obviously, all this kind of is tough to measure, right? For teams that are looking at adopting, Kubernetes, right? Obviously, if you listen to each of the provider, there are cloud specific provider. Then there's even cloud provider that are providing now kind of a cloud agnostic Kubernetes stack, like EKS anywhere from Amazon standpoint, for example. You have the OpenShift of the world, the Tenzu of the world, although I'm not sure where VMware is going to go with the acquisition and stuff. I think it's not looking great. So when you look at the landscape, right, how do you define what is a successful Kubernetes distribution? Because I can tell you I had meetings with every CEO of every of these teams, right? Including, with the Microsoft of the world and the Amazon and so on. And when we talk about, the need of the department to not get locked in and to use the benefit of Kubernetes to be agnostic and be able to run at the edge and run anywhere, right? That's kind of the foundation of why we picked it. We don't want to lose that. What you see, of course, several of these companies like Red Hat, for example, with OpenShift, brings a lot of opinionation, right? A lot of custom features, a lot of even CLDs that are very specific. Despite now Kubernetes having, ingresses, right? OpenShift still has routes and things, right? So very stuff I hate, right? I couldn't hate anything more than this kind of unnecessary, vendor lock-in just for the sake of getting you locked in, right? And so how do you define what is a successful Kubernetes distribution?
Yeah, it's a really great point and really a great question. So to us, probably the most important thing is to be upstream open source based, right? I talked about that already. We don't fork any of the core components. They are, the bits that the projects release upstream. That, and I wrote an article about this recently on the CNCF blog. That is the best way to build a platform that is future-proof, because it allows you to tap into all the innovation that is happening in the ecosystem. You're not on a proprietary fork. You're going to remain with upstream, and that's what all the other components in that ecosystem are aligning with too, right? So it's the best way to make sure that you can take advantage of all that innovation. It is also, we think, the best way to run a secure platform, because when CVEs are found, they get fixed in those upstream components. And so, one thing we do before every release is a vast amount of security scanning, and often, fixing hundreds of CVEs before any code goes out to our customers. And since there's still a lot of folks out there too, trying to build their own Kubernetes distribution in-house for their own needs, I would say, if you talk to those folks, what does it take to build a successful Kubernetes distribution? Well, if you're trying to do it in-house, do it yourself, it takes a lot of time that you might not be seeing when you embark on this project. And Nick, you mentioned it in the beginning, day two is really where all the hard work is, right? Where the vast amount of the work lies. Keeping the platform secure, keeping it updated, rolling forward. Kubernetes does 3 releases per year. So how do you ingest all that and into your environment? It's a tall order. Building on top of what I said, aligning with open source, building a successful Kubernetes distribution also requires, picking the right components. So not just aligning with open source upstream, but there's many options for every component in the stack. I think many of you have probably seen the cloud native landscape, this chart that the CNCF publishes that has all the projects in the ecosystem, for each different category, for ingress and service mesh and observability and storage and so forth. There is probably over 1,000 different components on that chart right now. And so, when you're looking at this, how do you pick the winners? How do you pick the components that are, again, future-proof, that set you on a path of success? And so, we did a lot of that work, really picking the right components, the projects that are, first of all, stable and high quality software that we are comfortable recommending to our customers for production use. Projects that are actively maintained, that have a healthy community, that fixes security issues and bugs, and components that integrate well with the other pieces of the ecosystem. Because again, Kubernetes, we're not just talking about Kubernetes as a solution here. The solution is assembled of over a dozen individual open source components. And so it's really, really critical to pick the right components there. I think another thing that's really critical, another day two issue that maybe folks don't think about immediately when they embark on this journey is, and software has a life cycle. So sometimes we also need to sunset components, right? This called maybe networking piece that we've used in the past is, no longer actively maintained, but there's a new thing. So really critical to building a successful distribution too is having upgrade paths, right? Taking the customers along with on that journey to, again, stay up to date with the latest and most innovative components, and giving them a bridge, giving them an upgrade path to roll their infrastructure forward. Because again, we believe that's kind of the only way, or the best way to build infrastructure that's resilient and secure and future-proof.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of great piece to pay attention to, right? Obviously, what you see often is if you ask Red Hat guys about routes, right? They claim, well, we created it because Kubernetes ingress didn't exist at the time, which is true, right? And then but then I'm like, okay, but it's been 3 years now, so what's your excuse to keep it, right? Well, we have to support the customer that uses it. I'm like, well, what's your plan to move them off of it so they can use Kubernetes native objects, so they're not locked into a CLD that's just on OpenShift? Well, there's no incentive for that, right? So same thing, you demonstrated that you were willing to effectively, rip the band-aid and move from Mesos to Kubernetes. A lot of these guys on a more granular level, they're not capable of picking the right pieces of the puzzle. You mentioned 1,000+ pieces, but even the most basic one, right? You look at container registry, right? Massive investment from Red Hat on Quay, right? Harbor on the VMware side and others, right? Obviously, different options. Harbor, we use, although we were concerned about the Chinese involvement there, right? A lot of Chinese contributors. So, for the government to be able to pick and choose and make opinionated decisions is important, particularly when you gain in maturity. I think some teams, right, want to have a less opinionated stack because they understand the problem, they know what they want, right? They come with their own mindset. But then other teams, like you said, just want a easy push button deploy, and they don't know much about all the detail. They just want the stuff to work, and they want to focus on their mission software to build software that makes sense for their teams, right? So how do you enable that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, our philosophy for building our products is, to build a complete and open platform. That's how we define it. So it's complete in the sense that if you just want the push button deploy, you just want to, use the defaults that we put in there, you can do that. There's a very easy installation process. You don't have to make any technology choices. You just push the button, you get a fully production grade day two ready Kubernetes-based stack with, Kubernetes and over a dozen of other add-ons. Really end to end, it's complete. You don't have to think about anything. But it's also open, because we think one of the biggest benefits of buying into this cloud native ecosystem is the many other projects that are out there. And so for certain use cases, the defaults that we picked may not be the optimal choice. And so that's why our platform is also open, and customers can basically turn off certain components that they don't want to use and use their other pieces instead. And we interface with these things through all the industry standard interfaces, container storage interface, ingress, you name it. I think Kubernetes did one thing really well, and that is, defined very good APIs for plugging in these other components. And so if you have, or you already have a observability solution, for example, and you don't want to use Prometheus, then you can do that. You don't need to install that component. You can just plug that into your existing solution. So complete and open is the key here, and that's how we enable people to tie into that whole ecosystem.
Of course, the feedback I would get when I would bring this up to some of those companies is, well, if we let you customize the stack, then we can support you. I remember the launch of OpenShift 4, right? Talk about a debacle. The service mesh was going to be brought into OpenShift with Istio, which we were a big fan of, and it was coming. And OpenShift was delayed on the fourth version was delayed for the government because of air gap. They couldn't support air gap, so they had put pretty much air gap on the back burner. And it took a year, by the way, a year of lag between the time that they announced and released the commercial version of OpenShift 4 and the time we got it into the government. That's a pretty long time for Kubernetes, as you can imagine. And we were using the 3x version, and I said, well, we want to use Istio, so you're bringing it in OpenShift 4. Well, let's install Istio now on the OpenShift 3 clusters, right? And they initially refused, because well, we wouldn't be able to support you anymore because you're installing something new on the cluster. I'm like, well, what's different with me installing whatever container of my choice? I had never even heard of a company, right, stop you from installing stuff on a product that's already supposed to orchestrate a workload. That's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. I had to go all the way to the CEO to get it, forced down their throat, pretty much. And we did it, and they had a lot of issues. And I can tell you, the government team supporting it, that brings me to another point, right? The government team supporting the engagement didn't even know what Istio was, right? So they were launching Istio as part of OpenShift Service Mesh, right? Of course, they always rename the stuff. I hate that, but and so they brought it, right? But they never even trained their consulting service team. So how do you have your teams keep up, right, with all this stuff? Because government customers, they want to pay, right, support, but they also have service contracts, right, with full-time engineers. And do we always get the team F, as part of the government engagement? So how do you give us the best teams so we have teams that actually at least understand the new stuff that's happening? I had to literally teach them and tell them what Istio was. That's a little bit mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I love our PS team. Those guys and Geralt are super smart. And how they stay up to date. Well, first of all, a lot of them, they stay up to date themselves. They're really involved in the community, and they look at the new things that are coming out. Some of those folks have labs set up at home where they just try out new things and do their own proof of concepts. And so they kind of stay up to date themselves. But one of the things too that we've adopted as sort of a principle or philosophy is we are a relatively small company compared to our competitors, our main competitors. And one of the big advantages we have as a smaller and more nimble company is just the speed at which we can work. And so we love working closely with our customers, get their requirements. When our customers show up and talk about a new technology that they're excited about, that they want to use, and we see it popping up in a few different places, we can move really fast in adopting that new technology and adding it to our offering. So we've often done this. We love doing design partnerships with our customers, where we sit side by side with them, we gather their requirements, we have conversations about these new technologies, and we can often turn these things around very quickly. Give them a field solution fast, and then even integrate it into our main product offering, a short while later. So we see that as a huge competitive advantage, that being that agile, and so that's why we love doing that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I guess looking at the size and the constraint of a smaller company, how do you get to compete, right, against the VMware and RedHats of the world? Other than being named, I mean, we got it. You're nimble, right? You're small. That's true to a point, right? There's then what else, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of waste. Twitter demonstrated that by firing 50% of the people, and suddenly, there's not much impact on production. But how do you make sure that you can compete against these guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk. You have cloud providers on that slide too, so I'll talk about the cloud providers a little later. We actually partner with those folks, and we think we have a really amazing better together story there. But in general, how does a startup compete with a larger, IT behemoth? We hit on some of the points already. We can innovate faster. We often brought new technologies from this cloud native ecosystem to our customers first. Examples are Cluster API, really exciting API that allows you to manage not just your stuff on top of Kubernetes, but also Kubernetes itself through declarative APIs, and doing that in a consistent way across multiple clouds, hybrid cloud, air-gapped environments, edge, anywhere really you want to run. So, we were one of the first to adopt that, as well as, other multi-cluster and fleet management capabilities like federation. So being nimble is one. I talked about the design partnerships already. This is something a smaller company is just structurally better set up to do. It's really sitting closely with our key customers, getting their requirements, and then quickly turning that around into a solution in the product. I think a couple of other advantages we have is, we can offer a pure play Kubernetes platform. We don't sell any other software. We don't sell virtualization software. We don't sell operating systems. We're not a cloud provider. We just do Kubernetes in a way, right? And so that allows us to build a much simpler solution, which is able to deliver value much faster than, the often sort of bloated offerings that we see in the market, that bundle a lot of other software. And so customers appreciate that because they see value much sooner. They can take it to production much faster. And it's also way more cost effective, right? A simpler solution means you're going to need less time to implement it. You need to buy, fewer professional services to do it, to get to a result. So it's a lot more cost effective than, other solutions on the market. For public sector in particular, one way we compete too is, we made public sector customers a first-class citizen right out of the gate, right when we wrote the first line of code for our product. When we founded the company back 10 years ago, we were the only game in town for large infrastructure. And so, a lot of organizations across the DoD, the intelligence community, the people that were running things at scale, engaged with us early on. InQtel is actually one of our investors. And so we engaged with that community early on, and we understand how, they run infrastructure and what their constraints are. And so when we designed our Kubernetes platform, we took those requirements, as first-class citizens. So we made sure it works in air-gapped environments right out of the gate. It's a much simpler solution for those environments than, bolting it on later down the road. The cloud providers, since you mentioned them on the slides, those are our partners. A lot of people love to use cloud provider Kubernetes offerings. And so what we do is we extend them with our day two capabilities, right? It's very easy to spin up a cluster on a cloud, but there's still a lot of work to be done to get it into a day two ready stack, right? Adding all those day two capabilities like observability, access control, and so forth. So, with our Kubernetes platform, you can actually adopt these cloud clusters if they're already running, or you can also start new ones, manage them from our control plane through Cluster API on any cloud or other virtualized infrastructure. And so we add a ton of multi-cluster and hybrid and multi-cloud capabilities that these offerings just don't include out of the box. Now, some of the cloud providers already have hybrid and multi-cloud offerings as well. But because they're cloud providers, of course, they're always going to make sure that the stuff works best on their own cloud and not on a competitor's cloud, right? So what we can do there as an independent party is, we can really, truly make sure that our multi and hybrid cloud capabilities really work well on all the clouds, and there isn't one that, works better than the other. It's really seamless. Again, it's based on pure and upstream Kubernetes. And, the other thing that is worth considering here, so the cloud providers also offer, a lot of these add-ons that you need around Kubernetes to make it production grade, like, identity and access management, load balancing, and so forth. But this is where, if you use those services, they're of course easy to use, but that's where you're creating some lock-in, because now you're using something that is specific to one cloud. And so that may be fine if that's the only cloud you're using. But, for people that want to be truly hybrid and multi-cloud, we offer an alternative there that is, truly portable to all those environments.
Yeah, that's the other important piece, right? Is supposedly Kubernetes was designed to be agnostic. Of course, depending on implementation, people get locked into different providers, different implementations. Someone was asking if D2IQ is FedRAMP accredited, authorized, but of course we can run it on the customer premises, so you don't really need to be FedRAMP because effectively anyone can deploy inside of their enclave. Most customers would want that. Not many want a managed service, but do you also have that use case where people want to have Kubernetes control plane managed? Are you looking at FedRAMP? Have you done any stuff on FedRAMP, or are you just deploying inside of the cluster managed by the customer and it's just a regular ATO?
Yeah, you're spot on. So the deployments always run in a customer environment, so we're not FedRAMPed. For customers that want more of a managed service, we actually partner with a number of managed service providers that offer something like that. So they use our bits, our software, and then turn that into a managed service.
Right. Yeah, and that's the way to go, anyways, right? Because multi-tenant control planes is pretty scary. I would stay away from it, particularly on the government use case. And so being able to deploy dedicated clusters and maintain that and support it inside of the customer enclave is the way to go. So to answer the Kevin's question, I guess you are accredited and you've been running across all classification levels, I believe, in DoD and some of the other agencies as well. I know DHS is also a big customer, I believe, and so that
right.
is already accredited as a product.
That's correct. Yep, and we run in environments up to IL6.
Right. And even above technically, because top secret is higher.
Right.
So okay, so we talk about life today, right? You kind of painted the picture of maybe helping people make a decision on how to pick a Kubernetes distribution. Obviously, there are others also, right? The smaller guys, interestingly enough, like the Rancher of the world got bought, right, always by the bigger guy. You're kind of the last one standing in a way. We'll talk about that later. But when you look at the market, right, particularly on the tech side, I guess, what's next and what is the next big thing?
Yeah, I love talking about the future. In fact, I often tell people that future is probably my favorite word in the English language. So there's maybe three big things that I'm looking at that I'm really excited about. And the first one is really what people have started to call platform engineering. At the last KubeCon in Detroit, platform engineering was, that was the hallway track. A lot of conversations around platform engineering. And what platform engineering is effectively is it means you're setting up a team that is responsible for developing and maintaining and operating a platform, which then all the individual development teams can use to deploy their applications on top of. So it's a little bit different than kind of taking DevOps all the way. And this was actually kind of an interesting journey to be a part of from our perspective. Having been in the space for so long, for over a decade, the way these container orchestration platforms were originally designed, the way Google runs Borg and how they designed Kubernetes, the way we ran infrastructure at Twitter and Airbnb, was there was a platform team that was responsible for creating that platform, and then development teams would run their apps on top. Now, of course, in the last decade and a half, DevOps was really being popularized, and DevOps really talks about decentralizing everything. You build it, you run it, meaning you build your apps, you're also responsible for operating them into production. And while I think that's generally a good idea, the platforms have become so complex that our DevOps teams often spend little time developing apps, doing mission work or business critical work, and they're spending a ton of time, too much time, on the platform. And so you have dozens of different teams across an organization all developing their own platform. There's just a lot of waste, a lot of duplication, and that amount of work that goes into the platform just kept increasing over the years. We have to make sure it's secure, that we can upgrade at any time, that it works on multiple clouds and hybrid cloud. We need CI, we need CD, right? It's just become a lot. And so folks have woken up to that and sort of decided, we need to really stand up a platform team and centralize the architecture and the operations of that platform. It was kind of a surprise to us when we engaged with Kubernetes, because we've always advocated for building a platform team, and but then we saw people really spinning up Kubernetes everywhere across an organization, and so the traditional IT organizations often weren't even aware that all this stuff was happening. It was really shadow IT, and but we've focused on this early on. So today we talk a lot about a Kubernetes distribution, and one of our products called DKP Essential, that's a Kubernetes distribution. But we also, when we introduced these Kubernetes offerings in 2019, we also introduced a product that's called DKP Enterprise. And what that is a centralized control plane for platform teams, for platform engineering teams, that allows them to manage their entire fleet of Kubernetes, wherever it may be running, on your favorite cloud provider or cloud providers, your on-prem bare metal or virtualized infrastructure, edge environments, doesn't matter. So it's a central control plane for platform teams to allow them to manage their entire fleet. So I think that's one of the next big things is, really stamping out these clusters, these different infrastructures in a repeatable way, because it's just way more effective. You can move much faster that way, much more agile. So platform engineering is one. The next thing that I'm excited about is really, I would call it serverless, although there's a lot of things out there that are being called serverless. But, the aspect of serverless that I'm excited about is really getting to a point where when I'm a developer and I want to run an app on my infrastructure, that I have sort of a business layer on top of Kubernetes that allows me to, define how to run this app in business terms. Today, I can't really do that. Today, I have to work with fairly low-level APIs, define a deployment, CRD, and there's an ingress that I need to be aware of, and all those fairly low-level components. And I think we'll see a layer emerge on top of that allows developers to specify, this is my app, here's my SLA. I want this to be, to have 5 nines. I want this to be immune to, a single region failure in a cloud, whatever that may be. And then that layer just translates that into, the lower level primitives and runs the app. I think, that's where things will go in the future. We're seeing a lot of activity around that right now. I think that's pretty exciting. But the biggest next thing, has to be AI. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about that these days. It's in the mainstream news everywhere. And, I'm very excited about AI, well, for many reasons. Personally, I'm really passionate about it and have been, since I built that spam filter as a teenager. But, I think we'll see AI impact Kubernetes in particular in many different ways. Let's start with the stuff that's, part of the mainstream conversation today, Chat GPT, these chat interfaces where AI, can answer any kind of questions. I think that will really help people follow best practices and, answer some of the really difficult questions around Kubernetes. How do I do X, Y, Z? What's the best way to secure my cluster? Things like that. I think it'll be really cool for that. Second is, using AI to automate the operations of Kubernetes. So I talked about our capability called Insights, which does exactly that, right? It uses AI to automate a lot more of the operations of Kubernetes and related components. So it sort of becomes your AI companion, your coworker that, knows a lot about Kubernetes and just helps you be more efficient with your infrastructure. And then third, it's just AI workloads running on top of Kubernetes. AI workloads need a lot of resources. They need GPUs and just a lot of infrastructure in general. And another thing that is changing about AI is, people are making AI part of their production systems, the products that they ship to customers or really mission critical systems. So, what we learned about operating software in general, running microservices and doing all that on Kubernetes really applies to running AI workloads in production too. Those are production systems. They need to be monitored. They need to have SLAs and so forth. And so we're going to see a ton of AI workloads spinning up everywhere. And, any survey you're looking at, people have decided Kubernetes is their platform of choice for running those AI workloads. So I'm super excited about that. Just also out of personal interest. I'm passionate about both infrastructure and AI.
Now that's obviously where the future is going. We're going to dig into a little bit of AI because I know this is a topic of interest to you, obviously, with your first spam filter, but also because of I guess my new engagement with Ask Sage, bringing GPT to the government. I think it's interesting how what I see already people do on the platform. We have 550 teams already on the platform, but in 4 weeks, which
That's
is
amazing.
pretty insane. 4 weeks,
Yeah.
The whole company didn't even exist 4 weeks ago. So, but before we go there, you met, and people were kind of reacting, right? Patrick was saying, hey, this is why we created Platform One, right? You were mentioning kind of all the people reinventing the wheel, right? Focusing on the platform work instead of doing the mission software, right? All this kind of reinventing the wheel, and you can all this shadow IT, right? Do you think the future is going to be headed in a world where similar to what I built in DoD, larger teams will have to have a platform team, and then that's going to be providing a service to all the development teams, or do you feel like maybe there is a universe because of the fact that you guys will simplify the Kubernetes nightmare and the platform work where every team is going to be deploying their own, or do you feel like having a platform team is still the way to go?
I think in most cases, having a platform team is the way to go. And I think if you're designing an organization, you're building a team, you're thinking about how should I do this? I think the key questions you should ask yourself is what should be centralized and what should be decentralized. And it's not always a straightforward answer, but I think since DevOps is top of mind, right? Like decentralization was what everybody did, and centralization, that was a bad word, right? Like building a central platform, centrally managed, those are all no-nos, right? And I think it was in part because some of the platforms that we used many years ago, they were kind of keeping people back, right? Like Java Enterprise, while it was a fantastic platform in many ways, I think as other programming languages started to emerge and development teams wanted to use Python to build apps, or Ruby on Rails, or things like that, because they knew they could move way faster that way, those platforms were getting in the way, right? And so development teams wanted to be more flexible, choose their own frameworks. And I think that was a big driver for decentralization and for DevOps, is because these older platforms were just too limited. They kept people back. But it's a different story with Cloud Native and Kubernetes, right? I think it has really nicely defined interfaces. I think, containers, just the fact that you can take any code and put it in a container and then run that container on a platform, that alone is such a critical innovation that it really allows you to divide responsibilities well between a centralized team and individual development teams. So I think that's what it comes down to, right? You think about what power do I want to give each of my development teams? So what I would do, for example, is I would say, we're going to bless a few different programming languages and allow people to use those, right? If a team is developing AI applications, they're probably going to do that in Python. I'm probably going to have a bunch of legacy Java applications lying around in my fleet as well. So we'll support that. And maybe you have some teams that are building user-facing applications, and they want to do that in JavaScript using one of the JavaScript frameworks. So those, I think, are that power I would give to the individual development teams, because they can do that and then just package it in a container, and the container gets shipped to the platform. Other things should be centralized, right? We probably shouldn't have many different ways to do continuous integration and continuous delivery. Continuous delivery because it's a very, critical piece of the puzzle. It has to work. It has to work right. If CD is down, nobody can ship to production. And of course, that's the process too, where if we're doing DevSecOps, right, a lot of our security work happens in that process. And security in general should be done by a central team, simply because there isn't really an advantage to doing it many different ways. You need specialized expertise. It's not effective to hire that expertise on every single development team. That should be part of a centralized team that makes sure that you have a stable, resilient, scalable, and secure platform on which the development teams can innovate. So I think, in general, it's a pretty high-level way of thinking about it, but I think that's what it comes down to. What is more effectively done centrally versus in a decentralized way. And then, since we're talking about, we talked a little bit about DIY too, and and distribution. So we still run into a lot of organizations that embark on a Kubernetes mission and spend 6, 9, 12 months getting their first app into production. And it shouldn't take that long. If you find yourself spending months to get your first app in production on Kubernetes, you're probably on the wrong path. DIY is, there's some organizations in the world that can benefit from that. But, really, we talked about all the work that goes into building a Kubernetes platform. That's all work that others have done. And, I would not do that in-house. That really takes away from focusing on your core mission.
Yeah, I've seen teams spend a year to build a platform just so they can build a line of code. That's
right.
Obviously not what they were created to do. And that's when you start multiplying those across organization, that's a and it's funny, right? Because people get excited about the DevSecOps stuff. It's shiny, it's fancy. People also see the benefit to their career, right? Because learning all this stuff obviously make them more valuable, right? And it's just fun and cool, right? And so people love the shiny objects, but right, you have to go back to the mission work. That's always essential. So I guess you talk about the future of an AI platform, right, running on Kubernetes and kind of enabling MLOps and all the pipeline of model and fine tuning and deployment. So what does that look like on Kubernetes?
Yeah, so we learned something really interesting when we looked into how would you do that? How would you design that? Which components would we use? How would you operate that? And when you're new to AI and you're embarking on a new project there, you're probably thinking that the hardest part is going to be to build the model or to get the data. We're going to have to hire all these smart machine learning PhDs to build these really amazing models. Well, it turns out when you talk to people that have been through this journey, and Google actually wrote a paper about this too, the hard work is actually not that, or the time-consuming part is actually not that. The time-consuming part is things like making sure there are enough compute resources available to build your models, making sure you have access to the right data, massaging that data, monitoring applications in production, having enough notebooks available for the data scientists to do their development work. So it's a lot of infrastructure work. It's a lot of problems, frankly, that we've solved really well for development teams that are building, just microservice applications. So what you can do is you can take a lot of that work that has been done and really translate it to the AI world. So since we're talking about a whole platform, a machine learning platform, AI platform, there are a ton of different steps, right? First, you need your data sets. You need to clean your data, reformat it, get it into the right format. You're probably doing development work there in a notebook environment like Jupyter. Then you're building your model. You're writing Python code in the notebook. You need to then train the model, often on a large data set. So you need access to a large cluster that has the compute resources available. And we don't want our data scientists to have to deal with infrastructure, spinning up machines, or even dealing with Kubernetes, frankly. They need to be able to work from within their notebook environment using the tools that they're familiar with, like Python. and Python APIs. And so you train the models, you train that on large infrastructure. By the way, fantastic open source projects out there that enable all that, like Kubeflow. Then you need to tune your models, right? So you're generally not building a single model, but you do many different runs. You do what's called hyperparameter tuning, finding the right parameters for your model. So there's a lot of, I would compare it to the build process for just getting applications out there, except you're building, you're running 100 different builds or hundreds of different builds, and then you have to pick the best one. So what comes into play here is, again, you need a high degree of automation. This is not something a data scientist should have to do manually. So an AI platform on Kubernetes needs to automate that piece. So now you've trained your model, you've tweaked your hyperparameters, you know what the best version of the model is. There may be additional, call them build steps. You need to make sure that your model isn't biased and things like that before it can go out into production. Now it's out into production. Now you need to monitor it just like you monitor any other production application, right? Is it responding within my SLA? So, kind of all the usual things we would do to monitor a production application. Can it handle the throughput and so forth? But also some specialized things that about AI workloads. There's this thing called model drift or data drift, meaning if I trained my model in a certain data set and then the new data that I'm seeing coming in production is different than my training data, the model may no longer be making optimal decisions. And so I also need to monitor, the new data that's coming in and how the model decides so that I continuously improve it. So there's an additional sort of dimension to how to run AI models into production. Now, that was a lot of stuff, right? I talked about a lot of different steps and a lot of different technologies being involved. And so, what's critical again is to have an integrated solution that like Kubeflow that allows you to do all these steps in an end-to-end way. Again, the great news is we can reuse a lot of the techniques and technologies that we use for running microservices and other applications. So, for example, if you want to monitor your models in production, you can use Prometheus and things like that to do that. So Kubernetes is a fantastic platform for running microservices. That was kind of the original purpose that it was designed for. And if you're looking at an end-to-end AI platform, just like a microservice architecture, you have a ton of different components here that need to work together. And I think that's a key reason why I think Kubernetes is the best platform to run AI platforms end to end.
So obviously that brings a ton of capabilities on top of Kubernetes. You have the cyber stack, you have the serverless potential stuff with capabilities to be agnostic from the Amazon equivalent of the world, right? So when you look at Knative, Kubeflow, right? Would you say also when it comes to serverless that going instead of Lambda, right, going to a Knative way, is that kind of the way to stick to a Kubernetes orchestration stack, and then you build on top, and just like you're going to bring Kubeflow and AI capabilities on top of Kubernetes, you want to do the same also for serverless?
Yeah, I think that's right. Serverless, it's one of those words that can mean a lot of different things, just like security, right? Like, what's security? There's a lot of different ways to think about security. And serverless is kind of the same. So, you mentioned Lambda. Lambda, I think is a good fit if you're in the AWS ecosystem and you kind of have a lot of workflow-based things, but, it is proprietary API. So I'm personally a huge fan of, serverless containers. So basically, you can run a container on a platform and you don't have to think about the underlying infrastructure. So it's serverless in that sense. It's auto-scaled for you. I think Knative is a fantastic technology. It's obviously part of Kubeflow and enables that. And I do think that, this is a critical piece of the puzzle of the infrastructure that, needs to be open source and needs to be maintained by a community. So, Knative obviously being part of the CNCF, I think, is the horse I'm betting on there.
Right, no doubt, yeah. I was probably one of the first user of it in the government. So same for Kubeflow. lot of CVs, yeah, and that's always interesting how even recent project they forget about the basics of cyber, using 4 or 5 year old dependencies, and even older than the project itself. You wonder how they picked it. It's always interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, how do you deal with that, right? Trying to bring an enterprise product on top of open source project that sometimes don't really even think about. I know the CNCF is trying to do better, when it comes to security and scanning, but many projects still get away with murder. So how do you deal with that? Do you go and push patches upstream and try to tell them to pay attention to scanning stuff and CVs and
Yeah, it's a variety of things. So, as I mentioned, we do a lot of scanning ourselves, and then, if we find things, components that have CVEs, we make sure we have the latest version, right? Those that fixes most of it. But it kind of starts earlier than that too, right? So I talked earlier about, how we select the components that make it into our solution, and so during that phase, that's a consideration too, right? Like, is this project alive? Is it healthy? Are they using up-to-date software? Is a key decision even at that stage.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So now we're gonna take a look at a little bit of what we were talking about before, which is okay. You have all this AI enablement stack, right? You talk about GPT, and we have Assay, which is built on top of GPT and other models like Kohi and others. How do you see that disrupting or augmenting the software world in particular, right? Because I can tell you for SH, it created the logo of SH, the term and conditions, 90% of the UI, the back end, right? The SQL stuff. So really, pretty massive benefits. I would say one developer equals 5, 10 by using the bot, generating the code and just great quality stuff when you use it right. And of course, it's all about the right prompt and how to use it and all that good stuff. But how do you see this disrupting the software world?
Yeah, so I like that you used the word augment earlier. That's really how I think about ChatGPT or AI in general. I think I'm not one of those people that thinks this it's gonna put us out of jobs and cause a lot of harm. I do think AI is going to augment our human capabilities. So I look at it as kind of like a better tool that allows us to be more effective. Kind of like when we came up with an excavator. Now we could, instead of picks and shovels, now we could just be a lot more effective at that particular task. So it is really like it is going to speed things up in that way. So I can ask it very specific questions to write some text for me, or like find the answer to a question. And so what I like about that is, it's really like asking an expert, right? And I should mention, ChatGPT, it's obviously early. It doesn't always give you the right answer currently, but it will eventually, because it is trained on, effectively the entirety of human knowledge, or almost the entirety of the internet. So if the answer is out there, the correct answer, then it will find it for you and show it to you. And so in that sense, I think it's like asking an expert. It's like going straight to the source to find the answer to your question quickly. And so practically what that allows you to do is it allows you to follow best practices, right? I can even ask it to write code for me, right? How would I solve this and that machine learning problem? And it will give you an answer. You'll still have to tweak it in most cases. It's not perfect yet. But what I find was actually one of the most surprising and I think innovative things about ChatGPT is when it doesn't know the answer to your question, it will still give you very useful pointers about how you might approach that problem. And so in that sense, I think it's really an accelerator. It doesn't completely replace what you need to do, but it certainly speeds up your job and gets you to the answer much, much faster.
Yeah, I can tell you, using it now, of course, for the company itself and even to build product for customers, you're right? It's going to make mistakes. It also depends on how good of a prompt you give it. And, we augmented it with real-time data and ingesting, custom data. So it's getting better and better. But when I ask it to write the lost password feature of Sage, and I say, hey, use generate a JSON web token that's 30 minutes expiration time, and use a SendGrid API to email it to the user, and he knew the SendGrid API and he wrote the code. In Python, I kind of died a little bit on the inside. I can tell you I would expect it to do like the big APIs, like Google stuff or whatnot, right? But knowing the SendGrid API and now how to use it was a little bit mind-boggling. And
Really
then the
amazing.
translation stuff, and the you give it Chinese JSON stuff, and it's able to summarize it and translate it in English, and it's just it's just mind-boggling, kind of the use cases. It's pretty much unlimited, and it's a lot about training the user more so than we think of training the bot. I think people need to learn how to use it. But yeah, I mean, augmenting for me, I mean, one developer can become 5. So it's pretty mind-boggling. Yeah.
Or how I like to think about it too is, it's definitely not perfect. You're going to have to check its work, but it's a little bit like, going from an individual contributor to now you just got an employee, and maybe that's a fairly junior employee. So you definitely have to, check the work, make sure it's accurate, but it is a huge accelerant. So
exactly. So, now moving to, the landscape of the Kubernetes companies, you're the last one standing that's not bought by one of the big guys, right? Rancher got bought recently by SUSE. Every time there is an exit like this, there's pros and cons, usually more cons than pros for the community. The big guys either make it so bloated and slow that they stop bringing the value they used to be able to bring, right? They lose the nimble aspect, they lose the the eagerness to compete, right? There's a lot of and the talent leaves and go elsewhere. I mean, most of the Rancher guys are now at Acorn. So obviously that's tough, right, for the big companies to retain. So that's how they acquire technology, right? And then they try to keep it somehow and grow it. Most fell at it, let's face it, right? You're the last one standing. I mean, I love it, right? I think but it's tough, right? So how do you do it?
Yeah, so I obviously don't know why others sold. I mean, for us, it was always we turned down those offers because we always thought that this market, this cloud native ecosystem, is still in its infancy, and that the vast amount of the opportunity is still ahead of us. Even today, I believe that. If you look at penetration of Kubernetes and related technologies, it's still a low percentage, and I do believe that most of our infrastructure in the future will be running on Kubernetes, but most organizations are not there yet, and it's going to take them a couple more years to get there. And so, a vast amount of the opportunity is still ahead of us. That's why we kept going, and I think part of and it is difficult. I agree with you there, but how we did it is, I think. First of all, you got to keep innovating, right? As a smaller player, that is your big advantage. You got to be agile. You got to be more innovative than the big guys, and that often also means that you shouldn't shy away from the difficult decisions. We talked about our transition from our Mesos-based products to Kubernetes. So those are big and difficult decisions, and I think you have to make those and be willing to move forward if you want to remain independent. I also believe that the market needs an independent Kubernetes company, a company that is not, selling other software, virtualization software or operating systems, a company that is not a cloud provider, because if you look at any survey, most organizations believe or are already running in a multi and hybrid cloud setup. So there needs to be an independent player, an independent company that can help customers make the best decisions around where to run their applications, their infrastructure, and how to do that in a truly portable way. And we are that company. That's who we want to be. I think two more points to make. We always look at where can we add value. So I talked about our Kubernetes management plane. This DKP Enterprise product that allows you to manage your whole fleet. We knew early on that a Kubernetes distribution by itself will eventually become a commodity. And so we also invested in capabilities that we will be able to defend for a long time, like our management product, EKP Enterprise. And then lastly, I think, and this is one of the most important things you have to do for running a company, is building an extremely talented team with a great culture, because customers don't just choose a product, don't just choose software, they also choose the people they want to work with. And we always get a lot of praise for the teams that are interacting with our customers, the expertise that they have, and just the quality of those people. Customers love working with them, and I think that's definitely a huge part of our success.
Yeah, no doubt. So the other piece, right, is your focus more than others, right? And I'll argue it's a good thing, because we need more patriots, and we need also people that get stuff done in the government. But it's also great during economic crisis, right? Because the government is still gonna pay and keep their budget up and running. Other markets might downside and make this less important, and you may lose the revenue. But what made you focus on the federal market?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that's been a focus for us really early on. And really how it started is, because we were the only game in town for doing modern infrastructure, containerized infrastructure at scale, and also helping organizations run cloud native data services at scale, things like Kafka and Spark. Little tidbit there. A lot of folks probably know Apache Spark. It's obviously a super popular technology for doing machine learning and data analytics. Databricks, the company around it, are really successful. We share the same roots in Berkeley, and actually originally Spark was a demo application for Mesos. And so, we share that lineage. We were focused on large scale. And so that just caught the attention of the folks that are running, large infrastructure and the government, the intelligence community and others. And, when those folks showed up and wanted to work with us, we saw a lot of very exciting things. Obviously, it's very exciting to be part of that mission, to contribute to our national security. But also from a technology perspective, every time I hear scale and building bulletproof infrastructure, I get very excited, and we got very excited because of the scale and the mission critical nature of these things. And that's why we engaged early with public sector customers. And I mentioned In-Q-Tel was one of our early backers, who really helped us, define our product offering, and just check all the boxes so that it can be deployed in a public sector environment. Our DNA, for supporting large infrastructure and mission critical infrastructure goes way back, way before we started the company. Just like Twitter and Airbnb can't go down, a lot of the government use cases are similar. They just have to work. They have to be bulletproof, and so that's in our DNA, and it's why it was an obvious fit for us.
Did you find, I know some companies have struggled, right, getting their talent to agree that, hey, we're going to help the mission of the government. They often live in the California bubble or whatever, right? Kumbaya bubble, I call it. They don't always realize the threats, China, all the stuff that's going on in the world. Pretty young crowd, obviously, don't know much of real life yet. So how do you deal with it? Do you see pushback sometimes when you tell them, hey, we're helping the IC, or we're helping the DoD? Are people complaining?
It's really not been an issue for us. And I think the reason is just we're very upfront about it, right? The organizations that we work with that allow us to put their logo on our website, like the Air Force and Customs and Border Protection, it's one of the first things you see when you go on our website. Their logos are there. And so for anyone who wants to join our company, it's right there front and center that we do work with those folks. And, I think people that have an issue with that, they just don't apply. So that's why it's really not an issue.
Not a big loss. So when you look at the economy, right, as a CEO, what do you see as challenges there?
Yeah, so from my vantage point, obviously I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen to inflation, and are we in a recession already? How long is it going to last? Is it going to be double dip? I don't know. I'm not an economist. Don't have a crystal ball. All I know is that, we are definitely in turbulent times. And that means there are, people are asking a lot of questions. People are nervous about their budgets. Obviously, IT departments, at least outside the public sector, are looking at cutting spending and doing fewer projects. And so, I think from my vantage point, one of the challenges I see is, what kind of cuts are these folks really making? And are they just cutting a certain percentage from every project, or are they making smarter decisions and saying like, well, I still want to invest in the future, right? I want to invest in being innovative. I think that's a real challenge in this current economy where there's a lot of uncertainty. I just worry that some organizations kind of cut themselves off from the innovation they could be introducing into their projects by just sort of, cutting spending across the board instead of being more selective and saying like, well, maybe we'll do fewer experiments in this time, but we want to still double down on what's core to our business.
Yeah, and at least they should keep investing so they don't go completely out of business. Right?
Yeah.
So there's a balance there.
And there's lots of success stories actually for companies that used challenging economic times like this to think about the future. And that said like, all right, it's challenging right now, but this too will pass, right? And what does the world look like when we get out of this? So let's make the right investments now to prepare for that future world. I think Cisco did something like this in the 90s, and it really helped them grow after.
So what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, good question. Well, let's start with what I just talked about, which is navigating the economy and helping our customers navigate this economy, right? IT leaders really have to make smart decisions around their budgets, and really I think the smart ones are not cutting across the board. They are bucketizing into what's must have and what's nice to have, right? Maybe we're not going to replace laptops every 3 years, but it's going to be every 4 years going forward, right? Maybe we're not going to do as many experiments as we used to do, and we're really just going to focus on those mission critical core use cases that have direct impact on our business, that either drive revenue or help us operate more efficiently. And so I really truly believe that cloud native is an innovation engine. Kubernetes and related technologies are an innovation engine on which an organization can really build next generation products that will help them be way more competitive. This is true for many of our customers. They're building our platform into next generation MRI scanners and all kinds of crazy things like that. And so what keeps me up at night is, well, how can I convince all those IT leaders that Kubernetes and cloud native is a must-have and not a nice-to-have, right? So I think about that a lot. Thinking about again this being an innovation engine, and using the examples we see across our customer base where folks were really able to increase their revenue or move faster or cut their infrastructure costs, whatever it may be, by adopting this technology. Another one, and this I think remains the biggest challenge with cloud native adoption, is the skills gap. I think we still see that way too many times, that this is really the skills gap is what's causing cloud native projects to fail. And so I like this quote that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. This is the future, but not everybody has the right skills yet. So how can we get organizations to that point where because cloud native is not just a new technology. You really need to set up your organization in a different way. And so helping organizations through that, it's changing an org and changing a culture is a huge lift. So, how can we accelerate that is another one that I think about. And then, lastly, I think a lot about AI. I mentioned I'm really passionate about that. It's a new technology that I think scares a lot of people, as every new technology does. It's funny because when the bicycle was invented, people were scared of bicycles too. And there were newspaper articles being written that, bicycles will cause mental illness and heart attacks. So this happens. This always
Every
happens when you
innovation is like that. So people freak out with GPT too, right? It's all the negative stuff.
Of course.
People are also negative nowadays, right? I mean, I see some negative, right? Like anything else, but I see probably 95% of massive positives. But people are so focused on
Yes.
the other downside. I don't get it, right? It's so toxic,
Exactly.
right?
And so how can we, and I really, truly believe that AI will make our lives better in so many ways. It'll touch our lives in so many ways. I mean, already, our smartphones are already like chock full of AI, and helping us sort our photos and type faster and things like that. It will, revolutionize medicine, cancer detection or early detection of all kinds of other diseases. Obviously, national security is super, super critical. So there's so many ways in which it will make our lives better. But like you said, as humans, we have a negativity bias. We tend to focus on the maybe harmful outcomes instead of the many, many, many positive outcomes. So, how can we have a conversation around that and make sure that every citizen, everybody understands the immense potential for making the world better, making our lives better. And I think as practitioners, as people working with AI, we have to also think about, well, how can we make sure that the harmful uses of this technology can be, contained in some way. I think that also needs to happen.
No doubt. All right, so I know we're out of time, but I'm gonna take one question from the public. Okay. So Patrick was asking, what are your thoughts on the D2IQ automation intelligence piece for building Kubernetes environment? Is the risk then encouraging over dependency of government customers rather than building internal expertise? And the point is often, right, that we hear the government people say, we shouldn't get in the way of business. We shouldn't even know the stuff. Government people don't need to know the stuff. They should just buy the service, right? RedHat complained to about me and Platform One to Congress and the Secretary of the Air Force, saying we're doing work that should be done by the contractors because we're creating a platform team and we should just buy one. And right, so for me it was important to have the skills, right? And just like the next worlds of tomorrow, we're going to need cyber guys, we're going to need all the next generation skills in the military, not just contractors and partners. What's your take on the balance between let's not waste time, on manual stuff, but let's also not get too locked in, and then also let's also teach the teams what matters so they are also able to understand the problem?
Yeah, I think the right balance there is really to work with a vendor that focuses on pure upstream open source. I think that's how you get the best of both worlds. You do get a vendor that can really support you, that solves all of these hard problems, does all that tedious work, like upgrading those components, testing them, fixing the security issues, and that also has, the expertise on staff, to make sure you have a secure out-of-the-box solution and so forth. So all things that would be very difficult to replicate if you do all of that in-house, right? You'd need a large team of experts to do that. But by choosing a vendor that focuses on pure upstream open source, you also avoid the lock-in. So if you ever have to break up with that vendor for whatever reason it may be, the core pieces of your infrastructure are open source. They are aligned on upstream open source. There's obviously things you'd have to rebuild in that case, like the automation and other things. But you wouldn't be, those core components are upstream and you're not locked in that way. So I think, and that's the reason why we chose this path to align with upstream open source, because I think it's a really nice sort of balance of power between a vendor and a customer. That would be my advice.
No, that was great. So Toby wanted to first thank you for the time. I think people learned a ton. I think they understand a little bit what to pay attention to between, the where to waste time, where to build a platform, how to partner, what to look in terms of flexibility and convenience, the future of AI. I mean, we talk about so many great subjects. So I wanted to thank you for joining. People, of course, can go and check out more information. You're on LinkedIn. You're, of course, all over the social media. We're going to give you the last words. Before that, I'm going to remind people what all the next event. Next week, we're not going to have a show next week because I'm going to be in France. So I'm going to be traveling for Ask Sage, meeting a few of the MOD customers. So I'm not going to be here next week. Sorry, so no show. Unfortunately, the week after, a lot of people ask us to do a different session. So we're going to do for the first time Ask Me Anything to me. So I'm not going to have a guest. The 28th is going to be you guys asking me questions live. So whatever you want to talk about, I'll be talking about that. Whether it's China, whether it's the balloons, whatever you want me to talk about, I don't care. I'll be talking about it. Same thing then when I'm on Fox or whatever. So we'll do that. And then you'll see a lot of amazing guests coming March 7th and 14th and so on. We have people booked pretty much until April. If you have names, if you have people that you think we should invite, please reach out to us and send us the name so we can reach out. That would be great. We need to start booking May and June. So with that, over to you, Tobi, for the last words.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much for having me on your show. We covered a lot of very exciting topics that I'm really passionate about, and it's always a pleasure to talk with someone who is as forward thinking as you. So thank you again for having me on the show, and a huge thank you to the audience. I hope you all learned some things, and if we can be helpful in your cloud native endeavors, feel free to contact me directly. My email is Tobi, Tobi at D2IQ.com. And I'm looking forward to talking to you. Thanks again for listening.
Not many CEOs that give their email, so that's great. With that, thanks everybody. See you not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after for the AMA. And in the meantime, you better keep up the good work so we keep fighting and make sure that our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.